So it's not often that I do a video on a single event, but I think we should remember this event. It all started in Tranent, which isn't exactly a place you think about unless you see it in the front of a 26 bus or perhaps live in East Lothian. In the town centre there is a statue which tells an event in 1797 where troops fired upon protesting civilians in a then small village. This is the story of the Tranent Massacre. It all starts with the Militia Act. The 1797 Militia Act allowed the Lord Lieutenants of Scotland to raise a militia when needed, but to do so they needed to register people into said militia. Effectively, this was a draft that could be called quickly when professional troops were running low, or something local needed to be taken care of. So imagine a cross between the Home Guard, Territorial Army, and the police gun squad, except you didn't really have a choice whether you joined or not. Well, actually, that's not true. You did have a choice if you were rich. Remember, this is 1797 after all. If you could find and pay for someone to go in your place, you could be exempt from service, as well as if you were a peer. Clergy and teachers were also exempt, and the latter weren't merely exempt for educating the children. It was their job to write the lists of all the people who were to be balloted into service. Every single able-bodied man between the ages of 18 and 45 had to be part of this draft. Women in particular saw this and realised that this could mean the young men of their communities could be taken out of their communities just as they had started to gain a trade, and it could be a ploy to basically remove people from Scotland. They weren't wrong because, well, militias were being used overseas. The protest was said to have been organised by one Jackie Crookston, although we cannot be too sure about that. She was said to have been the one who approached the soldiers on behalf of the protesters and demanded them to leave, and yet another account says that she went around the surrounding villages with a drum to gather up protesters for Tranent. Either way, she is memorialised in the statue at Tranent. The troops arrived to perform the ballot on the 28th of August 1797. Women and children lined the roads to protest. One woman apparently yelled, "John, beware of your head." This was taken to mean that there would be trouble in Tranent. The troops arrived at the muster point and were met by women and children with drums and sticks. It was said to have been here that Crookston told the soldiers to leave. The actual ballot occurred the next day on the 29th of August 1797, but due to the protest, the troops were confined to John Glenn's pub. Some accounts claim that the women and children were throwing stones at the soldiers, and that there was an attempt to read the Riot Act, which was made impossible by the crowd. But either way, the soldiers adopted a shoot-to-kill policy, ran out the back door, and started shooting. When I say they started shooting, I mean they drove the protesters out to the field where cavalry tactics were more effective and massacred them there. About 27 people were killed, including Crookston, whose body was later found in a cornfield. Some of the other people killed weren't even involved in the protest but were just out in the fields or along the roads at the time. Foresters, farmers, even schoolboys were shot at and killed just for being there. If this sounds familiar to another bit in recent memory, well, the more things change, the more things stay the same. One account from a survivor of the attack goes like this.
Adam Blair, a schoolboy, when walking peaceably through a field, to the north of Tranent, was ridden down by a party of the cavalry, who damned him, stabbed him in the arm as they rode over him, and left him for dead lying on the ground. Blair had so far recovered from the effects of the first attack upon him, as to be able to walk homewards to Penston, a village situated on the southeast of Enfeld near Tranent. He was walking in company of a boy of the name of William Tate, when the dragoons came up. One of them pushed Blair into the ditch by the wayside, and was going to stab him, when the boy called out for mercy, as he had not been in the mobs. The dragoon, however, struck Blair with his sword repeatedly on the head, and others of the party, in passing, also struck him, while he was lying in the ditch with his face downwards. In this situation the boy received 4 wounds in his head, and a stab in his neck, during which one of the soldiers called out, "That is the bastard whom I stabbed before," and the dragoon who made the last stab at him, said, "It is needless to put off any more time with him, for he is certainly dead now." Blair miraculously survived these repeated attacks, but by the great loss of blood, havoc of his person, and terror of his mind, he was for some time in a very feeble state of health, approaching to imbecility.
Adam later became the Reverend Adam Blair, and later on in 1835 wrote this letter.
"Dear Sir, I shall never, while I retain my senses, forget the bloody work at Tranent. I went to the school of Tranent that morning, by the master's previous desire, but finding no teacher, and the scholars dispersed, I remained some time in Tranent, and stood in the street while the lieutenancy arrived with the yeomanry and Cinque Ports cavalry. I saw also a party of the Pembrokeshire cavalry arrive. I remained in the town till the throwing of stones began, and the soldiers rode 4 times through among the people. When the firing commenced I left the street, and walked along the north side of the town, where 2 lads and myself heard well, and 5 or 6 dragoons rode over me as described above. I was examined by the sheriff substitute in Haddington, along with many others, with a view to the prosecution of the lieutenancy. This is said to have been set on foot by some of the Whigs of the time, but the matter was dropped. I have had some thoughts of drawing up a short account of the Tranent riot, but it will be more permanent in your larger work."
Another account recalls the soldiers riding to Addiston farmhouse and raiding the place.
The same party then rode on to the farmhouse of Adnistican, which is situated at the distance of 2 miles from Tranent, and here again most wanton outrages were committed. A number of dragoons rode up to the door of the house, possessed by the farm servants of Adnistican, and knocked violently. The mistress of the family immediately opened the door, and submissively asked their commands, on which a dragoon fired his pistol at her. The ball luckily struck the lintel of the door, and passed over the woman's head, but the flash of the powder was so near as to singe her face, and nearly put out one of her eyes. The poor woman, wounded and terrified, shut her door, and locked it, upon which the dragoons began to fire in at the windows, whilst others of them broke open the door, by battering it off the hinges with large stones. In the meantime the distracted family, consisting of a man, his wife, his brother, 2 fellow servants, and 2 children, attempted to make their escape from the fury of the soldiers, by leaping out of a back window, into a garden behind the house. But by the time they had run a few paces, the dragoons having broke open the front door, and burst through the back window in pursuit of them, apprehended and carried them prisoners to Tranent, though they had not even heard of the riot there, and could not comprehend on what account they had been thus attacked, and carried off as prisoners.
Another letter from a husband to his wife reads as such.
"Dear wife, this comes to acquaint you, that you need not weary for my returning home, for my sister is to be buried this afternoon at 4 o'clock, and I cannot come away till I see her decently interred. I am sorry to inform you of the cruelties that were committed here yesterday. There were 6 persons shot dead on the spot, of which my sister was one, and she was shot within the door of a house in the town. The number of wounded is not yet ascertained, but I am just now informed that 15 dead corpses were this morning found in the cornfields, and it is not known how many more may be found when the corn is cut, as the Cinque Ports cavalry patrolled through the fields and high roads, to the distance of 1 mile or 2 miles round Tranent, and fired upon with pistols, or cut with their swords, all and sundry that they met with. Several decent people were killed at that distance, who were going about their lawful business, and totally unconcerned with what was going on in the town. I am informed that this was unprovoked on the part of the people, for they assembled peaceably by public intimation from the Lord Lieutenant and his deputies, to state their objections, if they had any, to the roll, but when they presented their petitions and certificates, they were totally rejected, especially by Mr. Censored, who told the people he would receive none of them, as they were determined to enforce the act, and as the people insisted to be beard, he, with his own hands, pushed them from the door, upon which some boys and women threw several stones at the windows. The assistance of the cavalry was immediately called for, and ordered to charge sword in hand, and then followed the bloody business above related. but my hand can scarcely hold the pen longer to give you any further details.
Robert Dundas, Lord Advocate of the time, didn't really care about the brutality of the soldiers and instead placed the blame on the protesters, saying such a dangerous mob deserved more properly the name of an insurrection. I'm kind of surprised nobody talks about this event more often, but then again, I also suspect the narrative of government massacres village for saying no to conscription wouldn't exactly be something a government might want to talk about too loudly. Around 27 people died in this event, more than Peterloo and only 3 less than the Glencoe Massacre. But it should be remembered. It must be remembered.